All right, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to create a system for tracking an award, the award amount. So your complex logic should have stuck an award up here in the award constant. And we're going to create a system that counts up from 0 to that award so that we can display that on the screen so we see it rolling up instead of just flashing $500 on the screen. And to do that, we're going to use the count chop. Let's take a look at the count chop really quick. Chop count. Okay, so when you put one here, it says there's not enough sources because it needs an input to be able to work. Let's see. So we need to, let's see, count. Yeah, we need to send a 1 or a 0 to it, basically, and it's just like in a chop exec where it needs an off to on. And it does things while on, or it'll do things while on to off, and possibly things while off. We won't use those functions. We're going to just use the off to on and the while on. So for now, let's make a button. Just grab a button and plug the button into the input channel here on this count. Okay, change the button type here to, actually let's just leave it as toggle down for a minute. Okay, now, if I were to, with just the default stuff on the count, if I were to hit the button, you see that it goes to 1. And if I hit it and I turn it off and back on, actually I guess for now let's change this to a momentary. Momentary on the button type. Then make it active and then go ahead and press it. So every time I press it, you can see it's counting. Right? You can use this to, let's go ahead and add a constant. You can use this to track changes in a chop and like count how many times it passes a certain threshold. In our case, we're going to be mostly using it the way I just demonstrated, where 1s or 0s will be coming into it, and every time a 1 comes in, we increment. But you can also use it like on some sort of fluctuating thing where the data could be fluctuating, but every time it goes back to 0 and then goes above 0, it increments the count. So that's a possible use for it, right? And you can change the parameters here on when to trigger. So like right now it's triggering on a threshold of 0, so any value greater than 0 will trigger. But say I wanted it to do any value greater than 0.5, then this doesn't trigger until I get past 0.5. It resets when I go below 0.5. So you could count how many times you went over a certain threshold, and there's many different uses you could use for that kind of function. You can add a delay where it won't re-trigger until a certain amount of time passes to kind of lock out that counting. If you have a value that's hovering close to that, it may trigger like 100 times in a second, and that is not what you want. So you can use a re-trigger delay to keep that. You can also, on the count, you can, where is it? You can change how much it's counting. Let's see. Where is that? I thought it was here somewhere. The increment amount. Does somebody find an increment amount in this? Limit. Okay. Well, you can definitely do a loop min max and clamp. So right now I have it set to loop. So if this goes to 10, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it goes back down to 0. Okay, there's something here somewhere that does how much it counts each time, but I can't find it. Extend left hold. I don't know. All right, whatever. Oh, I'm on the wrong thing. Here we go. You can reset it by pulsing this reset here. Okay. And trigger on, you can have it trigger on increasing or decreasing values. We're going to leave it on the regular kind of mode. We're going to put this back, trigger threshold back to 0. We don't need a trigger delay. We'll leave it on increasing values. Is this? Yeah. And we don't want any limits for now. Okay. So, yeah. So let's put a. Let's put a null coming off of this button. Okay, and then attach to the count here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say while on, go ahead and turn this off to on to none. And while on, change that to increased count. So now, if I hold down the button, it starts counting up really fast. And that's kind of the function we're going to use. And when I let go, it stops. Right? So when I send a 1, it starts counting up. When I send a 0, it stops. Okay? But I found that it counts extremely fast. A little bit too fast to be enjoyable for the amount of awards that we have. Most of our awards are under 100. And if it counts to 100 in like 0.1 seconds, so let's go ahead and reset it really quick. See how long it takes to get to 100. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that long, right? And so you want an award of 100 coins to feel a little bit more of an accomplishment than that. You don't want to just go, done, right? So we want to slow it down somehow. Now there's no method in the count here to change the speed that it counts, unfortunately. So what you have to do is drive it, instead of driving it internally, you drive it by something else. And what do we use, what chop do we use to create a pattern that goes from 0 up to 1 and then back to 0 and up to 1 and back to 0 and up to 1? LFO, you got it. Right, so we can use an LFO here. So let's add an LFO. LFO, okay? We don't need it to go from -1 to +1, so we could change this to ramp. But then it would go pretty dang slow because it's not going to trigger. Well, it's going to trigger every single time that resets back to 0 and then goes above 0, it'll trigger. And really we don't need it to ramp between 0 and 1. We just need it to be sending 0s or 1s, or just sending 1s really. And there's another function on this. There's so many different functions in LFO. It's one of your main objects to use. One of the ones that it uses is pulse. And that makes 0s and then 1s. And you can change the frequency to make it pulse faster. So if I were to, on this count, go back to from off to on and say that is increased count, go ahead and turn off the while on function on the count, and then patch the LFO into this, you can see that it starts counting up. And now it starts counting up at a rate that I can control by adjusting this frequency. So the top of the slider is 8, but I can go past that. So I can go 20. And now you can see this counter counts faster. I can go 40, and it counts even faster. Now what happens if I say 100? It stops. So that's a little bit of an aberrant behavior. I'm not exactly sure, It seems to stop on values less than like 50 or greater than like 50. Let's see, does 50 work?
It quits when it gets to 60 because that's how many frames
right.
per second.
That's what that would be my guess, is that it has to do with how many frames are a second. The LFO can only do things per frame. So if I change this to 60, it stops. If I change it to 59, it still stopped. Well, it's not going fast anyway. So I found the most reliable, a good balance was about 45, because then it'll increase nice and fast, but not too fast, and it has good stability. I guess if you started dropping frames, it might affect your LFO as well. But everything on that previous version that I showed you, the full version, my slot machine is still running at 60 frames a second, so we're doing all right. All right. So we did that. We did that. We did that. All right. So now we need to actually create a system that, when there's an award, turns on this LFO to start counting up. The counter will start counting until it gets to from zero. Start counting from zero till it gets to the award amount, and then stop. Right? By affecting this play parameter on the LFO. When I turn that on, it counts up. When I turn it off, it stops. So let's see. We have the award here. And this award is getting populated by your complex payout logic over here. And what we can do with this is, if the award is greater than 0, meaning you won something, then go ahead and turn on this LFO. And in fact, let's right now, let's name this LFO. We're going to call this the count trigger. Count trigger. Count trigger. Okay? Actually, instead of resizing, I should just zoom in a little bit. There we go. Okay? I'm going to move... I'm going to get rid of this button and null. We don't need those. That was just to demonstrate stuff. What? Go away. Delete. Delete. Why won't you delete? Because you're active. There we go. All right. So, I hope I didn't delete something else by accident. I don't think so. Okay, great. All right. So what we're going to do this is, the first thing we need to do is analyze what's coming out of the award, what is in the award field. And if the value changes and the value is greater than 0, then go ahead and turn on the LFO. What do we use to analyze what's inside of a chop and execute code based on that? Chop execute, exactly. So I can right-click on the output here, go over to DATS, and choose chop execute. Or I can just make a chop execute and then specify award as the chop that we're going to be looking at. Okay? And then there are all these different things about, a lot of what we've been doing so far on chop executes are on off to on. This time we're actually going to use on value change, the default. Because we're going to look at any value changing in the award. All right. So what we want to do is, so let's go ahead and zoom in on this, make it active, and on value change, tab over. We're going to look at award and say, if the award is greater than 0, then we're going to affect the parameter of that count trigger LFO, right? So let me put the count trigger LFO in the screen here so that it doesn't get confusing for y'all. And I'll just make this a little bit bigger for demonstration purposes. Okay, so we're going to say if space op, open parenthesis, award, close parenthesis, close quote, close parenthesis. Then how do I look at the value? What do I have to look at? You have to specify a channel either by its index or its name, right? And you do that with a bracket. And then I'm going to use name chan1, close bracket. So that will look at the value, and it's if that is greater than 0. Remember, all if statements end with a colon. Go to the next line and tab over. Then we have to, on this count trigger, we want to affect this parameter here on play, right? So you can click the plus and it's called play. Okay, that was obvious. So op, single quote, count trigger, single quote, close parentheses, dot par, right? All the parameters start with dot par and then the name of the parameter, play equals, what should I put? 1, thank you. Okay, great. And then return. So if there's an award here, the count trigger should turn on. Let's go ahead and just force an award, come over here and say 100. Boom, it turns on and the thing starts counting up. Okay? Go ahead and turn it off. Just click on, go back to LFO and click on the play manually and turn it off. Okay, now we need to, what do we need to do? We need to take this and populate it into, oh, I named the, oh no, I didn't. It's called count 1. Yeah, okay. So then we want to do, what we want to do is have a chop exec attached to this count 1 that looks at the current channel number, the channel value. Right now it's 1605. Let's go ahead and reset that back to 0. Okay, so let's attach a chop exec to this. Okay, and we're going to also have this on value change. And just to make things easier, we're going to define some variables at the top here so that we don't have to keep typing, you know, op count 1, chan 1, all that stuff. We can just call it count. So make it active. Up here at the top, say we're going to define this variable called count. Count equals op, single open parentheses, single quote, count 1, end quote, close parenthesis, open bracket, single quote, chan 1, close bracket. So that will look at that value. We're also going to define, let's go ahead and put an award here. We're going to use award equals op award, close parentheses, open bracket, chan 1. That way we don't have to keep typing all that stuff out. And then we're going to have to also keep track of a bank. So like after it's done counting up, we want to take that money that it counted up to and stick it in the bank. So let's go ahead and define bank. We'll use a constant called bank. We'll just go ahead and put the code in it for it now. Bank equals op. We'll call it bank. Also chan 1. You can copy and paste this stuff if you want. I'm going to type it out so it gives you guys a little bit extra time. But yeah, you could just grab the other stuff and copy and change the text, which might be a little bit faster. And we also need to keep track of what the current count is so that we can reset the counter back to 0 but store what it ended up on to put it in the bank. That's a little confusing, but it'll make a little bit more sense when we actually do this. But for now, let's just go ahead and define this called cur count or current count. Cur count equals same thing, op cur count chan1 Okay, let's make our bank and cur count. These are constants, constant chops. So making a constant, and I'm calling this one bank. I'm going to duplicate that or copy and paste that and change the name to cur count. Okay. What was this for? I don't even remember. Oh, that was just to play around with the thing. We don't need that anymore. Okay, so now when the value changes, we're going to add some code. And the first thing we're going to do is set the cur count to be anything that might be in the bank plus the current plus count's output. So unfortunately, we can't. I can't use this cur count variable because that's pointing to the channel, and the channel you may or may not remember. If you're going to set a constant value, you have to go to its parameter value 0. If you're going to read the channel's value, you specify the channel. So we could create two different variables for that, but I'm just going to go ahead and specify op cur count. Whoops, the wrong cur count dot par dot value 0 equals, and then I can use my variables now and just say count plus bank. Okay, because we defined count and bank up here. So it's going to look at the value in channel 1 of bank, and it's going to look at the value in channel 1 in count, add those together, and stick it in cur count. Okay, and then we need to compare count if count equals award colon. So we're going to take a look at count and compare it to the award amount, and if the current count that the counter is counting up to equals the award, then we need to stop. So if count equals award, tab over, and now we need to, the main thing we need to do is our count trigger play parameter, we need to set that to 0. So op count trigger dot par dot play equals 0 to stop it. And then what else? What do we need to do after we stop it? We need to then update the bank. So I would say op bank dot par dot value 0 equals cur count. Okay, and then what else do we need to do? Then we need to reset the counter back to 0 because the award isn't going to increment each time. The award, if you get $20 this time and you get $50 the next time, it's going to be either a 20 or a 50. It's not going to be a 70. So we have to reset the counter back to 0 so that we can count up to 50, right? So we need to reset the counter. How do we reset the counter? It was here on count here on the count tab of the count chop, it's this reset pulse. Anything that has a reset with a button, or any button next to it for that matter that says pulse, there's a specific command you can use to push that button. And first you got to know what the parameter is called. The parameter is called reset pulse. And then the specific function is pulse, open parenthesis, close parenthesis. So let's take a look at what that would look like. Op count one, whoops, don't forget my quotes. Count one dot par dot reset pulse. And here's the thing that I was talking about, pulse, open, close parenthesis. That will pulse that reset back to 0. So once the count equals the award, we stop the count trigger. We take whatever is in the current count and stick it in the bank, and then we reset the counter back to 0. And then let's see. And then we want to, because we're changing this chop execute based on a value change, we want to set the award back to 0. Most of the time you wouldn't need to do that because you're not very likely to win 2 awards in a row, right? But if you happen to win 2 awards at the same level in a row, like 2 jackpots in a row, God forbid, then it's going to be 500 in there, and then it will still be 500 in there, and there is no value change, so it won't do anything, and it won't count up to 1,000. So we need to reset it back to 0 so that when you get another $500, there's actually a value change there to trigger our chop execute here based on the value change. So let's set that back to 0. So op award dot par dot value 0 equals 0. All right, let's try this out. If we did this right, we should be able to trigger a count. Make sure that your cur count and your bank are set at 0 and that your count is reset and back down to 0. Your count trigger should be off. And go ahead on the award here, put in something different. Put in, I don't know, don't put in something super high because then you'll be sitting there waiting for it to count up to that. Let's do something like 30. And you can see it starts counting up, and as soon as it gets to 30, it stops. And then sticks it in the bank, right? Let's look at that again. Go ahead and reset these values. I'm going to put this back to 0. I'm going to take my cur count, put it back to 0. And now on the award, all I have to do is put something in the award to make this work. So award, let's put in 100. Boom. So what happens? When there's a value change, this chop execute does its thing because we told it to do things on value change. And what does it do? If there's a value change greater than 0, because we don't want it to do this when we're just resetting it to 0, right? If there's a value change greater than 0, then start that count trigger to count. That count trigger here turns to 1. That causes the count here to actually do its thing. When the count starts doing its thing, then values are changing on this second chop execute, and so then it's looking at what is there. Each time a number changes, it looks at the number and says, is this number equal the award amount? If not, then don't do anything. Then actually, every single time in every single count, go ahead and update the cur count with whatever was in the bank plus the amount that the counter is counting to. So you're increasing that current count. And then when the count equals the award, then turn off the count trigger, update the bank with the current count, and then reset your counter and reset your award. So that's what's happening there. So does that make sense to you guys? I know it's a lot to process, but we have a lot to cover. Oh, let's go ahead and name this so that we can speak the same language. It doesn't matter because we don't reference this anywhere else, but I called it money counter. Okay. But does that make sense? So like you have to reference the parameter value 0 if you're going to change the number with code. If you're going to read the value, then you need to reference the channel, which is in brackets. Okay? It's a Python thing. Okay. So we should have a system now. Let's go ahead and test this out. So we're going to force this to do what we want. Force this to be a winning combination. And there's a couple ways. There's two ways I can think of to do that. One probably annoying way would be to go in your complex payout here, and instead of referencing math1 chan 1, math1 chan 2, and math1 chan 3 on each of these wheels, I could change it to the logic test thing over here, and then I could set these logic test things to be 777, and that would work. But a quick and dirty way of doing this is just make 3 constants over here. Copy, paste. I'm going to put them side by side. So I'm going to take these 3 constants and I'm going to plug the first one into the wheel post constant here, which will force it to be whatever I set. So I'm forcing this wheel post 1, wheel post 2, wheel post 3 to be the number that I have here, right? So then let's go ahead and actually just leave them as 3 zeros for now. And then just to make the thing operate, go ahead and hit the button. It's still going to take the same amount of time as it would have taken if the wheels were spinning, but the wheels won't spin. If I take a look at this, you can see the wheels are not spinning, but it's set to 3 bars. And then when it's done, you should see the award pop in there. Boom, 200. And so now it starts counting up to 200. $70, $80, $90, $200, boom, and stops. And then sets that to the bank. And so now we had 100 in the bank, and we added 200 to the bank, and so now there's 300 in the bank. Okay, let's go ahead and set this to something small just to test this out. So now here, instead of 0, 0, 0, change this to 1, 1, 1, which is 3 cherries, which is a fairly small award. And you can see it changes it to cherries here. And now push the button either on your graphic or down here on the button operator. And we have to wait for it to spin even though the wheels aren't spinning. And you'll see when it's done, you'll see the spin complete pop from 0 to 1. Boom. There we go. 15, it worked. And now I have 315. All right. So is that working for you guys? If you force win, you'll see your counter count up. Yes? Great. All right. Cool. Does anybody not understand what's happening here? Okay, great. I'm going to take your silence as assent. All right, so moving right along. Next thing, now we have a system that counts up. Now we need to actually print this out so we see it on the screen. We need to create some text to put on the screen. So we can, of course, we're going to be using the text, what is it called? Top. Right? But text top wants to be part of a two-dimensional top chain. So like my first inclination was to put it here after render before output, like this. But that sticks it here, and it actually makes it a little bit difficult to deal with because I'd have to like move it in just the right position, and there's a lot of rendering things that we'd have to deal with. And really the way we want to handle it is the same way we handled the wheels, which was, go ahead and take a look at your wheels, go back inside your wheels. Before we did these symbols, which are also a top, right? You can think of text as just generating a picture like you would load from your hard drive, right? So we loaded these slot symbols in here. But before we did that, we created our own with these text. Was that a picture? Yeah, it was text. And then we like rotated it 90 degrees and so forth. But as you can see here, the paradigm is you start with the two-dimensional top texture operator, and then we flipped it sideways in our case, and then you apply it to a material, right? So from slot symbols to the flip, and from flip to the Fong1 material. And then we map it to a SOP, a surface operator, a three-dimensional object. So what we're going to do is the same thing. Instead of like sticking text on our master display here, go ahead and just delete that text. Get rid of that. Have it go from render straight to the output the way it was before. We're going to create, we're going to map that text to a SOP that we can position in place. So create a SOP, a rectangle SOP. Okay. And let's see. We need a text now. A text top. Whoops, I clicked on the wrong thing. Text. Okay. And we need to send that to a material. A mat, a Fong mat. Okay, and let's see, how do I do that? You drag this onto this, and you say param, map that to the color map. Okay? Now, for the rectangle to actually receive that, we need to add a material SOP. This is just the same stuff that we did in our wheels. Then on the material, what do I have to do to make the material SOP reference this Fong1 up here? Anybody? There's only one parameter in the material SOP. What do you think I put in this parameter? Fong1. I could type it in, or you can actually just drag it in here like that, and that works too. And so now I have a black background with white text on an object that I can render in my scene. I'm not currently rendering it in my scene. And why is that? Well, the render flag's not turned on. If I do that, then it does this, which isn't really what we want to do. What we actually want to do is the same thing that we did with our wheels and every other piece of geometry in our patch so far, and that is stick it inside of a geometry component. So let's stick all of this, your text, your rectangle, your Fong, and your material. I'm just going to cut those. I'm going to create a geometry component and go inside here. By default, it gives you a torus. We don't want the torus. Paste in that stuff that we just cut. And so now we have, oh, you have nothing when you zoom out. Why? It's the same thing. You have to have your render and display flags turned on. Let's send this to a null, actually, going out of the material. That way, if we decide we want to put some sort of effect in between these two, we can. And here on the null, go ahead and turn on your render and your display. And now we have a black derivative square instead of it overwriting this thing and making it transparent. It is just another item in the scene, right? So now we need to adjust this square to be a little bit to be the right size. And I'm going to put it where I currently have my Lucky 7 slot machine, and I'm going to move the Lucky 7 slot machine down on the slot machine down to here. Down to this area right here. So let's do that. Let's see. First of all, let's turn off rendering on this just to get rid of it for a minute. I'm on the geometry that we just created with the text. Let's go ahead and name that just so we don't get confused. Call this, just call it text. Doesn't matter what you call it. We're not going to actually reference it. Well, first thing is I want to make, go back in it, and I want to change this rectangle size to be something a little bit different. I believe I had it as like a 2 to 1 on its size here. So it's twice as wide as it is tall. You want to change the text's, the resolution of the text to something a little different. What did I have before? I don't know. Let's see. Something like, let's try 100 by 50. And then on the text here, font size, bring that down to like 14. Okay. Yeah, that is really weird. Now on the geometry, I can scale this to fit where I want in the scene. So on the geometry here, I'm going to scale this. Let's see. I just want to drag it. It's really weird that I can't get it the size I want anymore. I don't know what's with that alpha problem, but whatever. So 0.2, 0.2, that shouldn't matter. The Z scale shouldn't matter because it doesn't have any Z depth. And now we want to translate it to move it up. Whoops, not by 1. Let me go back to 0 here. I want to use my value ladder on a 0.01 and start dragging that up. So I'm sticking this in the middle here. Translate over a little bit. Now I can adjust my scale on the X to make it fit. Let's try a smaller increment on the value ladder. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right, I need to move that the Lucky 7 slot machine down. So let me just try moving the Y first. Oops, that's up. You'll notice though that I got to move it forward in the Z scale. So because what happens is it starts ending up being below this geometry. So we need to move it forward. Like that, and then move it down. Didn't move it far enough forward yet. Oh, I'm close actually. All right, and now rescale this to kind of fit in that area. So I'm trying to get those little lines as a guide where to stick this. Let's try translating it over a little bit. All right, I want to scale it a little bit less on the X. A little bit less on the Y. I'm going to adjust the Z until it starts to disappear, and then I'll back up from there. Oh, why? Oh, I can't get it to go away now. There we go. 0.1. .09. It's really weird. I'm trying to get it to go just in front of this. Why does that keep hopping from 0 to point whatever? Let's put it at 0 first. Okay. I'll just have it at 0, I guess. All right, so that's all right for that. I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's just making this look nice. We have our text. It looks a little funky here, but I think it'll look okay in the actual view. It looks okay. Yeah. Maybe I want to change it's a little bit low resolution. I can change the resolution of the text and make this a little sharper. Let's try that. So I'm going to go back into the geometry here. And on this text, on the resolution, let's put this back to, let's put it at 200 by 100, I guess. Yeah, that looks a little better. And you can adjust the font size to make the text bigger or smaller. So if you make it higher resolution with a bigger font size, you can make the text a little sharper. If I make it a lower resolution and I lower the text size down, I can make it take up the same amount of space, but it's lower res. So why would you want to have a lower resolution? It would probably be for performance sake, right? All right, so now what we want to do on this text, I still don't know why we have this alpha issue. It wasn't that way when I built it, and then I did something and I wrecked it. I think all I did was change the name of this geometry to be called text, and for some reason that messed it up. Is it going to do it? Well, it's already messed up. Text. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay. Is there any alpha in this? Maybe that's all I have to do. Go back inside it real quick, and here on text 2, I believe you can set here background alpha, background color. By default, that background color is black. Turn the alpha up to 1 on the background alpha. Maybe that'll fix it. Yeah, that fixes it. All right. Well, that's one way of fixing it. I went here on text and set its background color to black, which it is by default, and then turn the alpha from 0 up to 1. So now there's no transparent pixels in this text. I didn't think that would matter because the Phong usually does that for us, where whatever isn't transparent on the color map is black, or whatever is transparent on the color map is black, but for whatever reason I had to do it this time. All right, so great, we have derivative. Now what we need to see instead of derivative is the bank, right? So let's try this out. Let's go into, all right, so what was I doing? Oh, right, we need to change what the text is displaying. So right, by default, it's displaying the word derivative. But as you may recall, you can use Python to set the text based on another operator. So what do you think? What operator should we be looking at to set this text? Bank. Yeah. Well, we could definitely use bank, but what happens when the bank actually doesn't count up? the bank only gets like set to the bank value. So we actually want to reference, what is it, cur count? Hold on, let me look. Plans, but that's sound stuff, text. Is it cur count? Maybe it's cur count. Let's see. I did in my notes. I think I ended up doing the same thing as what cur count is. I ended up saying bank plus count 1, which I think is the same as cur count. So I might just do cur count because let's just try this real quick. I'm gonna give myself another award. I'm at 315. When that goes to award of 15 here, boom. Yeah, let's just try referencing cur count instead of the complex code that I have in my notes. I think that'll work fine. All right, so here on text 2, we're going to reference, instead of derivative, we're going to reference cur count. So I hit the plus to expose the variables. You click on the blue and it immediately breaks it because it doesn't know what derivative is. If I wanted this to actually be the word derivative, I could put single quotes around it and then that will restore it. But we don't want to do that. We want to point to op, open parenthesis. How do I point to an op outside of this component? Yes, .. cur count. It still needs to be inside of, I forgot, it still needs to be inside of quotes. Even the .. needs to be inside those single quotes. Okay, cur count. And then I believe you would do chan 1. Chan 1. And you should see a number, 330.0. That's a little annoying. What's with that 0.0? Well, Python works pretty much exclusively in, well, not exclusively, but by default, if you don't specify, it wants to work in floating point values. And because we're not, the cur count is actually a number, it's casting that number as a floating point value. So we need to recast it as an int to chop off that decimal point. Which all you need to do that is say, instead of this, you want to keep all this code, but say I want this as an int, and then put all of what you put before in parentheses. And so now it's casting that value as an int. And when you cast a floating point value as an int, all it does is chop off the decimal points. Okay, so now it says 330. Let's go ahead and test out seeing this with our button. My button. So I'm hitting my button. I still have to wait for the thing to stop spinning, even though it's not going to spin. And then when it supposedly would stop spinning, you'll see that count up. And that's exactly what we want. Great. Okay, I think I remember why I did bank plus count, but I'm going to leave it the way it is for now. And it had to do with when we subtract 1 when we hit the lever. But for now, let's leave it. And we'd want to add the word bank before this. So it's actually pretty easy. All we need to do is you can chain together as many text operators as you want. This one is going to be referencing this cur count chan 1, but we can put one before it that just has a specified word called bank. So whoops, I clicked on the wrong thing. Text. So if I chain these together, I get probably derivative plus text. Oh boy, now I have the issue with the background stuff. I guess here on text 2, Let's turn the background back off. Otherwise you won't see that derivative. And we want to have the first thing in the chain have the background. So here, derivative. Let's turn the background alpha up on that one. So now we see derivative, and we see the number here below it. So is this where I set the resolution? 200 by 100. We want the first thing in the chain to actually set that resolution as well. Otherwise, it'll override it. 200 by 100. There we go. All right, now instead of saying derivative, we want to change that to the word bank, colon. And let's change the font size a lot smaller. We can actually have it be smaller than our number. And then what would we want to do if we wanted to push this bank over to the left? Anybody know? It's going to be in here somewhere. Position, yeah. Down here. So by default, this does pixels, which works, but you have to increment quite a bit to see anything. So I'm doing the ladder by 10 pixels. -50, that's about right. Cool. Let's push this up to the top because we're going to want, push both of these up to the top because we're going to want room underneath it to do those buttons that I want to be part of your homework. So go ahead here on position on the Y. Push that up to the top. And then here on the text 2 position, push that up to the top as well. Great. Cool. All right, that's working for the most part.